Welcome to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show with Corey and Justin. Here they are, the Fourth and Long Fantasy Brothers.
Welcome to episode 30 of the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. My name is Corey, and I am here with my actual brother, Justin.
Hello, this is Justin.
It's episode 30. Here we come. Justin, we are getting into the finals and the semifinals of the fantasy football playoff schedule. What's the news? Let's start with some injury quick hits. Why don't you get things started with a couple of running backs, Ronald Jones and Raheem Mostert. What's going on with them?
Yeah, news broke that Ronald Jones has a broken pinky finger. He's having a surgical procedure to get a pin inserted there. Week 15 is in jeopardy here, and they have to monitor reports on Ronald Jones. And then Raheem Mostert, he's having an MRI on his ankle that he aggravated. We're going to talk about these two guys later on in our show in our present segment.
Justin, what about the Los Angeles Chargers skill weapons? Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Hunter Henry. What's going on with these guys?
Yeah, right? All of the skill players in LA got banged up this past week. Allen and Williams with back issues. Hunter Henry with a hip issue. It's going to be interesting, man. Obviously, you're going to have to monitor reports as the week unfolds. If all of them happen to miss this week, which I don't think they will, I think they'll probably be back out there. But if one of them or two of them does happen to miss, it certainly hurts the Chargers offense in general.
Justin, Deebo Samuel didn't last long this past weekend. What's going on with him?
Yeah, hammy for Deebo here. Shanahan has already come out and said that he's going to be out multiple weeks, man. Brandon Ayuk should continue to dominate and be a wide receiver one from here on out.
And Justin, a popular streaming quarterback is Matthew Stafford. What's going on with him this week?
Yeah, he's potentially out for the remainder of the season, which is unfortunate here. And if he does, in fact, happen to miss week 15, potentially the rest of the year, it definitely hurts all Lions skill players from here on out. You have to keep an eye on reports.
Speaking of hurts, Justin, last week you were very interested in what was going to happen with the Eagles offense. And what did you learn?
The offense just looked a whole heck of a lot better, to be honest with you. Hurts energized that offense. They ended up putting up a bunch of points, actually beating the 10-2 Saints. Impressive performance for the rookie quarterback. Looks like a solid add in dynasty formats from a quarterback position perspective. And, it'll be interesting to see how the season unfolds here, man, for the Eagles. I think if Hurts ends the season strong here and he puts together a couple of performances like he did this past week against the Saints, man, I think the Eagles are going to have a really tough time going away from him next year.
And Justin, I asked if Tyler Lockett was going to be someone who needs to lose his wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 tag and more be considered a wide receiver 3. And if this past weekend was any evidence, he looked more like a wide receiver 3, right? Another kind of semi-unproductive game. It wasn't a complete dumpster fire, but it definitely wasn't the Tyler Lockett we expect, right?
Yeah, Metcalf and Carson are the really only two Seahawks skill players outside of Russell Wilson that you want to own these days.
Yeah, you can still start Lockett and hope that he'll have that boom game, Justin, but he's definitely not a must-start anymore, right?
No way. I think he's like a wide receiver 3 flex at this point. If you've got better options, like talked about Brandon Ayuk earlier, man, I think you're starting Brandon Ayuk over a guy like Tyler Lockett.
Crazy world we live in. That's 2020 for you. Tyler Lockett is being benched for Ayuk, and that's just sort of the fantasy football season summed up for you. Well, with that said, Justin, it's about that time. Let's get to it.
On today's show,
all right, we continue our weekly format for you this week. Today, Justin and I will discuss a past, a present, and a future topic as we reflect on Week 14, the week that was for many of you. It was your quarterfinals of your fantasy playoffs, maybe even your semifinals, and get you prepared for your Week 15 matchups. Justin, why don't we get things started with a wide receiver that you and I absolutely adore, and that's Mr. Stefon Diggs.
Yeah, Diggs continued his reign of dominance on Sunday Night Football against the Steelers. He just looked like the best player out in the field, man. He really has the entirety of this season. Now, Stefon Diggs is the first player in the NFL with 100 catches. No Buffalo Bill has ever had more than 100 catches in a single season, and he's already up to 1,167 yards, and he's on pace to set the Bills' single-season receiving yard record, man. I mean, this guy was way too undervalued when it came to his draft ADP at the beginning of the season. He was right around that kind of wide receiver 25 position across most platforms. But Corey, man, you and I had him in the top 12. I got to give us kudos there, right? There's a couple of things that I learned from Diggs' performance this year, right? When I reflect back on Diggs as kind of the example. And it's number one, you can't really predict how an offense will perform based on prior years, right? Case in point, the Buffalo Bills, the Seattle Seahawks, right? We were so accustomed to them being run-heavy offenses. Well, that hasn't been the case, man. They've been some of the most pass-heavy offenses, especially the Bills this year, they've really shifted their offensive philosophy and their offensive scheme to pass heavy with Josh Allen taking a big step this year. And then number 2, man, situation matters, but talent is king. And Diggs is a top 5 talent at the position. Now, Diggs is poised to end the season as a wide receiver 1. He's, I think, a top 5 wideout right now in PPR formats, a top 8 wide receiver in standard formats. And, man, he's going to be one of the top wide receivers off the board in 2021. And like I said earlier, Corey, I'm going to give ourselves, you and I both, a collective pat on the back for our call on Stefon Diggs this season.
And just sort of a heads up to our listeners out there, this happens every year. This happens with guys like Stefon Diggs all the time. You see it with Keenan Allen. You see it with other wide receivers. There's going to be someone that the market's going to be low on. Could be a guy like Julio Jones. Could be a guy just like this year with Adam Thielen. You just don't know who it's going to be, but there's going to be a really, really appealing opportunity there. This year it was Diggs. You and I saw the writing on the wall, and we're going to take the victory lap on this one, Justin.
Yeah, it could even be a guy like maybe DJ Chark next year, right? If they get a good quarterback out there in Jacksonville. So yeah, I think trust the talent, right? We talked about that all preseason here, leading up to the season with Diggs. And man, if those guys that took the plunge on Diggs as a later round value, they're really reaping the benefits right now.
Justin, you want to talk about a guy that sort of you reap the benefits for? How about the Los Angeles Chargers quarterback, a guy who many weeks ago I was saying should be your waiver wire pickup? And that's Mr. Justin Herbert. Now, a once fantasy darling quarterback has become a bit of an anxiety-inducing start now. So what's happened? Why is Justin Herbert not the top 5, 6, or 7 quarterback that we were becoming used to? Well, he hasn't been exposed, but boy, his offensive line has. Herbert is seeing a lot of pressure these days, which leads to less of the bomb throws we were accustomed to. This past week was interesting. We saw a much more horizontal game out of the Chargers. Reminded me a lot of what Phillip Rivers used to have to do in his later years in LA. Screen passes, short routes, and other horizontal concepts made up a good chunk of the LA game plan, and that's going to lead to a more conservative quarterback output. Again, I'll reiterate that this is due to a porous offensive line. Herbert hasn't been figured out in my mind, and to me, seems like he can still sling it with the best of them. But his devil-may-care attitude has had to change because the timing he once had has now gone and is nowhere to be found in these past 3 weeks. So what does this mean for your fantasy playoffs? Well, look, if he's your guy and he's got you here, go for it, right? If he got you where you are, I would keep that up. When it comes to the playoffs, getting cute is a bad call in my mind. Live and die with the stars that got you there. Getting creative will only make for sleepless nights. And if Herbert got you there, I'm starting him. Now, there's some added issue here when it comes to his skill weapons being down. If all those guys are not going to make it into this coming weekend, then yeah, it's really time to look at some other options. But as long as 2 of those 3 guys are going to be out there, I would highly, highly encourage you to keep running Herbert out there because, man, he really is a good thrower, Justin.
Yeah, Corey, you make a couple good points there, right? Ever since really Austin Eckler's come back, his average depth of target has really fallen. He's not that gunslinger, throwing the ball down the field sort of quarterback passer that we expected. You know, I think most people out there were expecting in some rights a bit of regression because he was on a historic pace as it relates to rookie quarterbacks. I mean, he's a talented guy, don't get me wrong, but a lot of people were calling for regression. You mentioned the skill players, the offensive line. The equation's not really adding up here for a successful end to the season for Herbert, but I'm not looking at it that way completely for next year, right? I think he's still a top 10 quarterback dynasty-wise. But I would say that if his skill players do happen to miss this week, if his offensive line is still banged up, I think there were a couple guys that got hurt this past week, you might want to look elsewhere, man. That's all I got to say there.
So, Justin, if you're also looking in sort of dire straits at another position, is there someone out there in the running back class that might be worth a start going into this week of the fantasy playoffs?
Yeah, Corey, I wanted to talk about San Francisco running back Jeff Wilson Jr. Now, we talked about Raheem Mostert's injury earlier in the show. Mostert aggravated that ankle injury that had sidelined him previously, and I fully expect him to miss week 15. He got an MRI this week as well, which is never a good thing, right? Now, Jeff Wilson is the priority ad this week, and if he's on your waivers, man, I'm saying drop all of your fab to get this dude. Now, we know Shanahan's backfields have been gold for years now, and Jeff Wilson is going to be the golden boy who's going to carry you guys to the fantasy championship this week, man. He should very well get every opportunity to tote the rock 20 times against this putrid Dallas Cowboys run defense. I don't care about this past week's performance from the Cowboys. They were playing the Bengals, right? Back in week 7 when Jeff Wilson got the start, he creamed the Patriots defense, man, to the tune of 112 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was actually the FedEx Player of the Week that week. Pretty crazy. He's my number one ad this week at an ever-evaporating running back position.
Yeah, Justin, so you addressed the Raheem Mostert situation. I'll take the reins on the Ronald Jones situation. Now, the question is going to be this week, especially if it's someone who's in a tough situation, myself included, being a Rojo fan, if you have options and that Tampa Bay backfield. Is it LaShawn McCoy or is it Leonard Fournette? Now, Fournette, being a healthy scratch this past week, spoke volumes. And the question became, who would be the next man up for Tampa as the man to give Rojo a break? And that was either going to be McCoy or they were going to give Keyshawn Vaughn, an actual shot at this. Well, that answer was LaShawn McCoy. McCoy is no one's first choice and is clearly far from Tampa Bay's first choice. But if Rojo is to miss a game with a broken finger, McCoy becomes an intriguing option for a team that might be in a bind. Not just for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but for your fantasy team. The Tampa offense has learned not to use their running backs in the passing game. You can thank the early struggles of Rojo, Fournette, McCoy, and Vaughn for that. But against an Atlanta team that promises to produce some points, goal line opportunities seem to be plenty this weekend. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Fournette becomes the next man up, but Fournette most likely isn't available in your leagues. I think there's a chance here that Tampa knows what they have with Fournette, and spoiler alert, everybody, it's not great. The shiftiness of McCoy and him most likely being available makes him not the worst option in the world, even if it is a stomach-churning one at that for Week 15. And for a team that is trying to stay alive in the playoffs, if you're just trying to make it to the next week and you had Rojo and you were banking on him and you don't have other options, McCoy might be it. And as for Fournette, I don't know. If you got him and you think he might get the start, go ahead. But how brave do you feel? I mean, could it pay off? Sure, it could. But it almost feels riskier than McCoy at this point, Justin.
Yeah, Arians, is going to play it close to the vest here with this situation. There's a lot of guys that could emerge, right? I mean, we could very well see McCoy get 15 carries, maybe a touchdown. You could very well see Fournette come back into the fold and run 15 to 20 times with a touchdown, man. You're going to have to keep an eye on reports here. It's risky, but we do know the success that Tom Brady has with running backs. And if I'm a Ronald Jones owner, man, I'm trying to roster LaShawn McCoy this week with the hope that Arians comes out and Fournette's potentially inactive again this week, and McCoy's given the job, man.
Right. If it's McCoy with Vaughn as an emergency, McCoy becomes really, really appealing. But I guess we'll have to see how that goes. Now, Justin, before this episode started, I would have told you Rojo is my league winner this year. Is a guy who I've been touting ever since day one. But now it doesn't seem like that, unless that pinky finger injury is being overstated right now. But with that said, if Rojo's not going to be the 2020 league winner, who are our 2020 league winners this year?
Yeah, man, I've got 4 guys I wanted to cover off on here that I think are going to be your 2020 fantasy football league winners. The first guy I want to talk about is Jonathan Taylor, man. This guy has arrived. Now, back on our Week 12 show, I had this guy in my future segment as I felt he had taken control of this Indy backfield, and boy, is he ever, right? I mean, since he returned in Week 13 from the COVID IR, he's had back-to-back games of over 130 total yards and 3 touchdowns over the span of those 2 games. And he's actually Pro Football Focus's highest-graded running back since Week 11. The next guy I want to talk about is Cam Akers, man. Another guy I referenced on last week's show. We talked about him on our past segment of our Week 13, Week 14 show. Now, the passing of a torch, man, has officially occurred, ladies and gentlemen. Cam Akers is the Rams running back 1, and after putting up 179 rushing yards against the Patriots on Thursday, he's an unquestioned high-end RB2 until further notice, man. Henderson and Brown only played 6 total snaps. And for those of you that waited, it's time for my man Cam, man. Starting with confidence in a cakewalk matchup against the Jets here in Week 15. The next guy I want to talk about is David Montgomery. Now, Montgomery is quietly a top 10 running back because over the last 3 weeks, he's given you top 5 performances at the position. I told you folks weeks ago to buy Monty. And if you listened, he's going to win some fantasy championships for you guys. And then the last guy I want to talk about is Brandon Ayuk. We talked earlier about Deebo Samuel's injury. And Brandon Ayuk, man, has really emerged over these last 4 or 5 games. Did you know that Brandon Ayuk has the 5th most PPR points all time from a wide receiver through 10 career games? Now, the injuries to George Kittle and Deebo Samuel have obviously helped vault this guy into legit wide receiver 1 territory on an absurd 30% target share, man. This guy's getting looks. This is another rookie wideout to add to the pile of first-year studs.
Justin, my ears were ringing there, and they were ringing because you brought up a name that I want to talk about right now. You said injuries to George Kittle and Deebo Samuel. Well, let's talk about Mr. George Kittle. Now, we intentionally did not mention him earlier in the show in the injury segment. He has been on injured reserve for quite a while now with that nasty injury he had going on, but this one may be flying under the radar a little bit. Now, George Kittle is slowly making his way back to the fantasy football reality. And if by some miracle you manage to make it this deep into the playoffs without him, a little nugget may be waiting for you this week. Now, as a big fan of Kittle, I've been monitoring this closely, and all signs, Justin, point towards Kittle making his return either this weekend or next. And Kittle is an athletic freak, and we know how injuries react with athletic freaks. They sometimes can heal at a superhuman rate. And Kittle is one of those freaks who might have an opportunity to suit up this week. If he does, either this week or next, the question is, can I trust him? And the answer is, of course you can. But can you trust anyone these days? I mean, we got Josh Jacobs trolling fantasy owners on Instagram with false news. But no matter the case, I go back to what I said. Trust your studs. If he's out there, I'm playing him. He's a game breaker, even at 75, 50, or even 25%. Justin, if Kittle's active this weekend or next, it might be a surprise. But would you play him?
Corey, I think 25% of George Kittle is probably better than most of the tight ends that are out there, right? I mean, after you get past Kelsey and Waller and maybe Hawkinson, I'll take 25% of George Kittle over the field there, man. If he's active, you're playing him, you're starting him. Good on you if you're a team that has Kittle and you made it this far into the fantasy playoffs, man. If he's out there, you're starting him.
So there we go, Justin. It is our Week 15 show for the 2020 season, and it's now in the books. Next week, we continue our weekly seasonal episodes. We're going to recap Week 15, and we're going to get you ready for Week 16 for many folks out there, the fantasy football finals. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell. Download, follow, like, comment, whatever you have to do to show some support. I'm Corey.
And I'm Justin.
And this has been the 4th and Long Fantasy Football Show. Good luck in your fantasy football playoffs.
Royalty-free music courtesy of Ben Sound. The views and opinions expressed on today's episode are that of the 4th and Long Fantasy Football Show. Remember to like and subscribe.